So there are 5 basic survey designs. So we have the mailed survey, the group administered survey, the phone survey, the in-person survey, and the electronic survey. So the mailed survey, aka the self-administered survey, this is where you mail questionnaires to respondents, and they would then administer the survey themselves. And so this is kind of difficult to get people to do, and you want to make sure, in order to get the highest response rate, which for any of these surveys you want the highest response rate you can get, because if you get too low of a response rate, then that means that the sample that you're getting is not going to be representative. It's going to be biased in some way. So if only, say, like half the people send it back, then that means that the people that took the time to send it back, they're different in some way from the people that didn't. And that's not what you want. You want a representative sample that represents your population. So you want to maximize the response rate for any of these types of surveys. So for the self-administered survey, you want it to be, to maximize the response rate, you want it to be an attractive, a pretty questionnaire. And it sounds dumb, but it is. If it looks nicer, people are more likely to fill it out and take it seriously. You also want clear, understandable questions because they're administering it themselves, so they don't have anybody to ask for clarification for anything. So you want to make sure all the questions are as clear as possible, and so even more so than in a situation where somebody might be there to help explain it. You want to minimize open-ended questions because they are writing everything down, so you want to make them do that as little as possible. So it's best to have mostly closed-ended questions with just a couple of open-ended questions at most. You can offer a small incentive. This is fine for any kind of survey, but for something like this, especially because you want to give them an incentive to take the time to do it and to send it back. And so it could be something like, they get some kind of coupon for something free mailed to them if they do this, or like they're entered into a draw or something like that. So that's totally, totally fine and a good way to increase response rate. You also want to make it as easy as possible for the person doing it. So you include the stamped, self-addressed envelope. They don't have to do anything. They just have to put it in there and drop it in the mailbox. They don't have to pay for postage. They don't have to write out the address. Everything is done for them to make it as easy as possible. And also probably going to have to use follow-up mailings of the survey because people don't tend to do it on the first go. So if they get it a couple of times, they might just do it. So you'll get a certain amount that'll do it in the first round and a certain amount that'll do it in the second round, and you want to keep doing that until you get your desired response rate, which should be at least 70%. The minimum acceptable response rate is around 70%. You get lower than that and it starts to be a biased sample, which you don't want. So the higher the response rate, the better, but around 70% is what you're aiming for. So the group administered survey, this is kind of where you have individual respondents. They get together in a group and everybody sits down and they do it together. So this is really good for things like student populations. So you have everybody together in a classroom and so then, or at an event or something like that. And so everybody's there and everybody does it at the same time. Or you have offender populations in prison would be a really good place for this because everybody is already there. So it could be like when they're all gathered together in like the rec room or something, or during programming or something. You probably don't want to take their yard time away, but if it's something where they're okay with giving up time, maybe taking time out where otherwise they would be sitting alone in their cell, they're probably going to be okay with that. But then again, they're all together in a group and you get them all to do it at once. Or you have employees of a particular company. So everybody, in one department comes together and they get a half hour off work to do this or something like that. And so response rates tend to be really high for these because you already have everybody there and they're just, since everybody else is around me is doing it, I may as well do it. And that's the kind of mindset. So response rates are typically pretty high for these group administered surveys. But there are 2 problems. First of all, most populations can't be sampled this way. So this doesn't work for a lot of populations. But where it does work, you still have to be cautious because if the respondents feel coerced in a way, that's not a good thing. And they might feel this way because, everybody around me is doing it. So if I don't do it, then everybody's going to know. Or like if you're in a setting in a company, or students in a classroom, may feel like, oh well, the instructor is going to know if I don't do it, or my boss is going to know if I don't do it. And even if there's no official repercussions that happen, well, they're still going to know. And so then they feel like they have to do it because everybody else is doing it. And so they're still going to do it, but then they might be less likely to answer honestly because they feel coerced and they kind of don't feel happy about having to do it. So you want to be aware of that. So because you want them to answer honestly, and you don't want them to feel coerced. We don't want that. So you have to make sure that it's clear that this is voluntary. Then you can do a phone survey. Phone surveys are where you have people call up respondents on the phone and just record the answers as they're asking questions. So these are the people that cold call you and then say, do you have time to answer a quick survey? That would be phone surveys. People don't like this, so you have to really work to maximize this response rate. You're going to need to do multiple callbacks because people don't pick up their phones. If you're trying to landline, then that's going to be problematic if people aren't home or they just don't answer it. So you're going to have to use multiple callbacks. Interviewer has to also be able to verbally convey the information because you can't use any kind of visual aids, you can't use pictures or graphs or anything like that. So you have to be able to describe the questions, the concepts, the vocabulary easily so that anybody can understand it. We can use what's called CATI or computer assisted telephone interview or some other software like that, but something like that can help standardize some of the procedures. So CATI in particular, the interviewer uses the computer to enter the responses and then it goes automatically into a database. So it takes out the step of having to take the notes or the responses that you got during the phone survey and then entering them into a database. It cuts out that step. And then it also automatically follows skip patterns and asks contingency questions where it's relevant and things like that. So it helps standardize the procedure and make it flow a little more smoothly. So the maximum amount of time you would want to take in a phone survey is 30 to 45 minutes. But even that is pretty long unless you have somebody really invested because they really care about what you're asking them about. But typically, even if somebody's being nice and answering your questions, you take too long and they're going to just hang up on you. So you want to keep it as short as possible and not take any extra time that you need to. So then in-person surveys or interviews, so these are face-to-face interactions, so you have somebody sitting in front of you, the interviewer is asking the respondent questions, and this makes it so that you can go longer because if you're just having a conversation with somebody, it doesn't feel the same as having to sit and talk to somebody on the phone or write your answers down. So you can go longer. There can also be more complex interviews because you can explain things. You can sort of follow tangents and follow paths a little bit and get more information that way. So very good for qualitative data gathering. And for an in-person survey, you want to really balance the rapport and control. So you want the respondent to feel safe answering questions. You want them to be willing to spend the time answering questions, answer honestly, but you also have to maintain control so that all the interviews are essentially equal. And so, if you start explaining things differently or ad-libbing, that can then make the responses no longer comparable across different interviews. So you want to maintain that control. So, but if you do that too much, if you're too controlled, then it takes away from that rapport. So you want to be able to have that nice balance. And computer-assisted measures can help with that, where you can use a computer with the interviewer's help or without. But again, too much of that computer use then reduces the rapport. So you want to keep that balance. In order to maximize the response rates here, if you're specifically going into cities have lower rates because it's harder to find people at home. It's harder to get into apartment buildings. If somebody has to buzz you in and nobody's going to buzz you in because you don't actually know anybody in the building, you can't access those people if you're trying to just kind of go door-to-door type surveys. Interviewers are also less likely to go to certain areas at night, for their own safety, so that can cause some problems. And it's also lower in single-person households because you're less likely to find people at home. People are less likely to let you in for safety reasons. So there are some problems if you're just kind of doing the door-to-door thing. Although you can set up interviews and get people to come to you, especially if you are particularly sampling, you're doing some purposive sampling and choosing certain people you want to talk to. So that's different. But the door-to-door thing can be really tough. Refusal rates also are going to vary based on education and income. If somebody is less educated, they might be less willing to be interviewed about certain topics like political issues or something like that because they don't want to feel dumb for not knowing stuff. or there'll just be a lot more of the, well, I don't know responses, which aren't as helpful. And also, if somebody has higher income, then they might be less willing to discuss anything pertaining to economic issues. So, well, why should I tell you? I don't want to tell you my secrets of how I get my money, kind of thing. And even if that's not what you're asking about, that might be the perception. There's also certain societal strains and cynicism in general that can reduce rates. I mean, if it's decreasing trust in the research overall, like, well, why should I bother with this? Why should I believe you're using this the way that you claim? So that general distrust and cynicism that can make things difficult as well. Especially again if you're doing the just door-to-door cold calling of people trying to just get them to do these surveys. There's going to be a lot of distrust there. And then the last type of survey is the electronic survey. And this is where you have what probably most of you have done more often than any of these other types of surveys. And that's where the survey is sent by the computer and it's administered by the computer. So it can be sent through your email, there can be a website or a link that you're given or anything like that. But the survey is delivered through online, through your computer or your tablet or whatever. And then it's also administered that way. And so it's easy, it's cheap, it can reach really large geographical distances, including internationally, very, very easily. And as the image shows, this can be completed on computers or tablets or phones. There's so many possibilities to help increase these response rates. And so this is the most popular way of doing surveys because it's so easy and cheap and you can basically survey anybody. But one major issue is that it's often not possible to obtain a truly representative sample. For one, if you are just mass spamming this out to like a whole bunch of people, then that means you're actually getting really low response rates. Even if you get higher numbers than if you had done it another way, if you spam it out to like, say, 10,000 people and you get like 1,000 responses, that's only a 10% response rate. Whereas if you had actually, tried to phone up, say 500 people and you got half of them you got 250 of them to actually respond to you, that's a 50% response rate. So that's higher. Both of them are still relatively low, but doing the electronic survey, that means that possibly the people you're getting are going to be biased in some way. There was something about them that they wanted to do this when most people didn't. So, and then also it'll be things like, people don't, especially people in the elderly population, they won't do this or they don't know how to do this or people that don't have internet access, which there are still a lot of people, especially people living in poverty, which might be a population you really want to know about, but if they don't have internet access, they won't be able to do this. So it's sometimes not possible to obtain a true representative sample when you're using electronic surveys. But I mean, in general, you can also mix and match all of these designs to increase response rates, to allow the strength of one design to compensate for the weakness of another. So, you could maybe start with a web survey and then switch to phone or mail surveys for people who don't respond. So there's no one best type of survey. You have to use the type that's best suited to your research goals and that's best suited to your sampling goals.